Support for Amplified Voices comes from the Restorative Action Foundation. Learn more at restorativeactionalliance.org.
Everyone has a voice, a story to tell. Some are marginalized and muted. What if there were a way to amplify those stories? To have conversations with real people in real communities? A way to help them step into the power of their lived experience. Welcome to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. Together, we can create positive change for everyone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Amplified Voices. I'm your host, Jason, here with my co-host, Amber. Hello, Amber.
Hello.
And today, Amber, we are recording from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, special live recording. And we have a special guest, Joe. Hello, Joe.
How are you doing, Jason? How are you, Amber?
I'm doing really great.
So, Joe, we're going to start off the way we usually do, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your life before you entered the criminal legal system and what brought you into it.
Well, I'm from Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and it's a town in Pennsylvania where football is king. And I played quarterback for Downingtown, and I was the prince of our town at one point in time. I was a really well-liked individual growing up. I was very kind to everybody, and I ended up committing a crime. I tried to start a cult after my career had ended.
Whoa. So you go from like football star,
Yes,
local community hero, to now what made you think like start a cult?
it started at probably about age 5 when I watched my brother and like his friends bringing girls in and out of our house. About 5 years old, watching that and mimicking everything that my brother had did. My brother was like my god growing up. So I watched him and the behaviors were fostered in me early. And it's not like I had like a bad upbringing from my parents, my mother and my father. I was a black kid from the suburbs. So I was fortunate enough to have both in my life. But the behaviors in me, I knew at an early age that I had a different sense of control over most of my friends and most of my peers. So I used my athletic ability, and I realized that at a young age that people were easily manipulated by my words. So I ran with that, and eventually it became what it became.
So an example, what are we talking about? I mean, was there alcohol, with drugs involved?
Drugs, alcohol, a bad philosophy that I'd learned and applied and had people believe in that was truth. It actually came from a style of music that I grew up listening to. It's the Memphis Underground. So I took a lot of the lyrics and I applied everything in life. And I thought that I was going to be able to create essentially a family, when in actuality, this family was more like a cult rather than a family with beneficial ending. This ending was going to be nothing deathly, nothing crazy out that nature, but I really didn't have a plan or anything to end this. I was so young, but it was all because I fostered so much pain in my heart because I didn't want to be this athlete.
Right. So, wow. So I'm thinking about, you're saying that you had siblings that you were mimicking behaviors from. You were living in the suburbs. So you said you had 2 siblings. Is that right? Okay. And so you're a football star. You start to notice that you're well liked. Your words can have power, things like that. So I'm still trying to find out how we get from, okay, I'm going to math class. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, today I'm going to math class and I'm going to the game, after, and I'm transitioning. Did that feel like a gradual thing? Did you just realize one day it was happening? Let's unpack that a little bit.
It probably started when I was in my youth. I was always obsessed with like footage of world leaders and dictators and like the power that they had over other individuals. I was always obsessed with that as a child. So it really started in my youth. And it gradually went all the way into that phase of my life.
So how old are you at this point that we're talking?
Probably 7 or 8 years old.
No. Once you're like post-football.
Oh, post-football, I was 23 years old.
Are you asking them to do things that are illegal?
At first, no.
At first, no.
Yeah, and then in the beginning, at first, no. In the beginning, I was asked to mentor the student athlete population. So everything was good-natured in the beginning. And I had things that I was going through in my life and in my household, and then things with having children with a person that I didn't want to have kids with. So really it was ultimately like a pity party for myself.
Having children with someone you didn't want to have children
Yeah.
with. Like,
I had a one-night stand with a person, and she ended up getting pregnant. And then her and I, it was all just a bunch of things that compiled onto my head.
was she part of the cult?
No.
So she's out. So you have a woman that's outside of the cult. You have a child with her. And is the child living with you?
Yes, we're both living together. Her
She's
and I
living
had a
with
one-night
you,
stand, and then she ended up getting pregnant.
and you're doing this cult thing. And when you're talking about your followers,
Yeah.
so it was like, that's my day job. I go home to my family, and then I have these
I
followers.
was actually working as a custodian in the school district, and
Okay.
that's where I basically started everything out. I was working as a custodian in the school district where I played football at, and I basically started it there.
Are your followers minors?
Some of them were students, and some of them were out of school. And yes, they were minors in the beginning.
So mostly minors that
Yeah.
you're relatively young at that point still yourself. You're 20s, 21, 22, but you have minors that have that worship you because you were the football star.
Yeah, the old football star.
Yeah. I think I saw that in a movie.
So, of the things that you're describing that sort of you were going through, you have this situation where you're starting a family earlier than you thought you would, but you mentioned sort of other things. Talk about that a little bit if you feel comfortable.
I witnessed a lot sexually in my house growing up, even though I had a really good upbringing. I can't stress that enough. But mimicking my brother's behavior, it really turned me into something that he didn't know that this was going to end up happening to me. He thought this was normal behavior. This is how I treat my brother. My brother's no longer alive, but this is how I'm supposed to, my brother, I'm showing him how to be a man and this and that, because our father worked 2 jobs. So my vision of a man, besides watching my dad come home from work, my vision of a man was my brother, my older brother. So.
Okay. And so you graduate high school, you're working in the school. What did aspirations for college, or was that something that was out of reach?
My brother and I, we started a music group, and we were DJing techno music, and we traveled all over. We traveled to about 9 different countries. We played music and stuff everywhere. So my life really didn't look that bleak. I really had kind of life by the blank.
You can say it.
Yeah.
You can say it. We have difficult
I feel like I had
conversations,
life, it's really hard for me to actually even explain the
You
monster
had
that was
life by the balls. You wanted to say it, man.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. All right. So if you're looking at it at that point, if I saw you in those years, you would say, I'm it.
Yeah, to
Right?
myself.
Right? I have a good life.
Yeah.
I've got the music stuff going on. I've got people following me. I've got this job. I've got a kid. Everything's good. All right. So what happened?
I started feeling sorry for myself. My career with football didn't start to go the way that it went, and I had nowhere else to look. I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to do this. All I wanted to do was play football. So I thought, when I went to prison, I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do either. So I was so confused at that time period in life, I couldn't find my direct path. And I kind of lost myself, and it's really saddening to think about how deep I lost myself in that moment. All I had to do was ask for help, and I didn't know how to do that.
So if someone said to you, what do you want to be when you grow up? You'd say, I don't know.
At that point in time, what I would say, if I wanted, when they would ask that, I would say, I wanted to be a football player, so I thought.
Oh, okay. Were you trying to play
Yeah,
professional?
I was actually trying to walk on at a local university to punt, because I knew I could have got my film out there and the footage out there, but none of that transpired because of my drug use. I was afraid to let them really know I was struggling with alcohol, psychedelic drugs, weed, women. I was really struggling at this time period.
And what was your first exposure to those things?
Probably when I was about 11. I started smoking weed when I was about 11, but my whole life I had watched parties. Parents didn't really drink much. My parents didn't smoke weed, but I watched my brother and his friends.
Yeah, so it's what you knew.
Yeah, that's it.
So you had this issue. You were already struggling with substances.
Yeah.
and then you were getting your followers to do the same.
Yeah, they would smoke weed.
And they're young.
Yeah.
And so what happened? So is that how you ended up arrested?
No, the encounter took place between me and one of my victims, and she had went and told one of her friends at basketball practice the night after everything had happened. So her friend had notified the basketball coach, and the basketball coach had notified the principal. The principal had let the police know that, hey, we think that something happened, and that police officer and I had a pretty good rapport with one another. He called me and he asked me to come to the station. My mom raised me good. I knew that I did something wrong. That's what landed me in prison for 13 years, one time.
Okay, and so just to be clear, there was harm that occurred between yourself and an individual that was attending the school.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you get a phone call from the police, and they say, come down to the station. And what are you thinking in this moment?
I'm scared as hell. I've never been in a situation like this. I didn't realize that it would get this far. I didn't have the wisdom to see that far into my life that I knew it was going to crash, but I didn't know it was going to be this severe. So in that moment, I just became fearful and didn't know what to do. Didn't tell anyone, didn't talk to anyone, and I went to the station on my own.
And just to backtrack for 1 second, you're 23 at that point? So you're 23. You have, how old's your child?
My kids at the time are 2 and 1. I have 2 children.
So you have a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old. You have a girlfriend.
Yep.
And you're called down to the police station, and you know something's up. And then what transpires? What did they?
They called me to the police station and they questioned me. I told them, the truth about everything that happened and the things that didn't happen, how this happened, why this transpired. And the police officer told me basically to sit there. And when he came back, he had an arrest warrant for me, and I didn't see the streets for another 14 years.
So we're gonna slow that down a little bit, but you had never seen don't talk to the police messages.
Yeah, but it was a lot different when I was placed in that when I was placed in that predicament. It was completely different. Like all the law and order stuff and don't talk to the police, it went out the window.
Why?
Because of fear. I was really afraid, and I felt like my mom said, listen, if you ever get caught up, you have to tell the truth. Like, you don't lie to me, so you don't lie to other people. I knew that the cat was out of the bag.
So it didn't matter what you had heard before. You were scared.
Yeah.
And
plus, I didn't want to be living that life either anymore.
And
I knew that I was wrong.
And you knew the harm that was being caused was in fact harm.
Yes.
So in your mind, you're hearing your mother saying to you, when you've done wrong, you're getting caught up. And so in your mind, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go down, and perhaps if I'm telling the truth about the things that have happened, that will end up in my favor.
100%.
Right.
That was an awesome way to put it.
Right. So, in systems that might work differently or in rational thought, one might think that. But just to be making it clear, there was no indication in your mind like, oh, it was just a thing. No. I didn't cause any harm. No. That was not what was going through your head.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so your experience was different from what you had expected it to be.
Definitely.
Okay, so you skipped over 14 years in your conversation, right? So you ended up, do they send you home that day?
No, I went straight to the Chester County Prison on February 5th of 2010, and I never saw my house until November 9th of 2023.
So I'm sorry. So I'll do those years in a second. But so you said to them, you basically said I'm guilty.
Yep.
And they put you in a cell.
Yep.
And so they set bail?
They gave me a bail at it was $45,000 in the beginning. And they added more charges on a corruption of minors I was bailed out for 7 days. My mom paid a bunch of money to get me bailed out. I was bailed out for 7 days, so they added on 2 corruption of minors charges because of her 2 friends being involved in this. So they said it was corruption of minors, that I asked them to smoke weed with me, I asked them to drink a 40 with me, and I solicited her one friend that if you come out west, we can have a relationship. So they gave me criminal solicitation and 2 corruption of minors charges to take away my bail, and then they set my bail at $75,000. But I was advised then by my uncles and stuff who had done time to just stay in prison and just fight, because this time could actually be accredited to whatever they give you. So that was the advice that I had taken at that point.
And then you stayed in how long before you were actually sentenced?
18 months.
Okay, so I'm sure that...
Because I went to trial and my district attorney was pregnant, so she kept continuing. It was literally like 11 continuances. Each month, basically, it was a continuance on their behalf, but my lawyer never let me know any of that type of stuff.
During that 18 months, did you think that there was a chance you would be found not guilty and let out?
A chance that I would be found not guilty on a certain charge that they had gave me. The other charges I admitted to. So that's why I ended up going to trial, was to fight the involuntary deviant sexual intercourse charge, because I admitted to the statutory sexual assault. I admitted to the criminal solicitation. I didn't know the law.
So you're incarcerated, you're trying to make sense of the system, you're trying to make sense of the wide scope of charges that are being brought against you. And so during that 18 months, you were in jail.
Yes.
Okay, so then sentencing comes, or you went to trial.
Yep.
Okay, and so tell us a little bit about that. What happens during trial?
The voir dire process in Chester County was probably the most confusing process, I guess, because I didn't really see too many people that looked like me in the process. So from the beginning, I was afraid. I didn't feel like I had anyone who could possibly represent me in the jury. So it was really covered because I was an athlete, so everything was in the newspapers. Everyone knew in the prison my situation. But I was really candid and open about my situation when I was in prison. I said, this is what happened. And I never really tried to mask it, hide it. I couldn't. Everyone read the newspaper and everything was on the front. So the process of trial, I guess, is like, they would call me over, they would have continuances, and I would sit down in the bullpen, go upstairs, sit down in the bullpen, go upstairs.
And then the day you're told...
13 years.
13 years.
But I ended up doing 14 because parole, I got a parole hit when I was in prison, but 13 years. The day that they told me about 13 years, I looked back, my mother was dying and my brother was also dying. My brother was sick and my mom had stage 4 colon cancer, but they wouldn't allow both of them in the court because they said it would influence the jury to say that, oh, we feel bad for his mother, we feel bad for his brother because they're sick. And
we couldn't have that as a society.
My mom.
We couldn't see you as a human being with family, right?
Yeah.
But 13 years hits you. I mean, when they say 13 years.
I couldn't even imagine because I had to look back at myself. I'm like, 13 years, kindergarten to 12th grade is 13 years. So I went from being 5 to 18, 13 years, 23 to I'll be out when I'm 36, 37. I couldn't see it. And all I could see was my mother passing away and my brother. Like, that's the only thing that I could see was that.
And so at that moment, clearly what you're not thinking about, you're thinking about this system and what's happening now. What you're not thinking about is your own actions, right? So then you're sentenced, and where do you go from there? Do you end up in a state prison?
Yep. After I was sentenced, I went back to Chester County for maybe about 4 or 5 weeks. And after that, they call you up and the guard will just say, that means you're going upstate. So at that time, we had to go to Graterford first. So I went to Graterford. I was there for about 2 weeks. And then from Graterford, they sent me to Camp Hill. Then classification. Camp Hill at that time was a classification jail. So you would go get all your medical stuff, your psych stuff, all that. So then they could send you to what at that time was called your home jail. So I was at Camp Hill for 8 months. I actually thought that was going to become my home jail. Then I was snatched out and I was sent to Laurel Highlands, which is in Somerset County, which actually was prison utopia at the time. And it really saved me because I don't think that I would have lasted mentally in the other harsher prisons in PA. Laurel Highlands actually saved me at that time.
So for those folks who are not familiar with Pennsylvania, because we have listeners all over the country, how far was the prison that you ended up in away from where you lived?
It was 354 miles exact from my house, from where I was born, but it was on the same road. It was on Route 30. So I would look out the window and I would see Route 30 and I would think 350 some miles away is where my mother and father are.
Mm. Did that impact their ability to come and visit you?
In a way it did, because my mother was sick at the time, but I had a lot of love and support, so they did come and visit, but not like it would have been if I was at SCI Phoenix, which is 30 miles from my house, or at SCI Chester, which is 30 miles from my house.
So once you landed there, were you there the whole time?
I was there. I was at Laurel Highlands for my first 8 years. And then I transferred to another facility, non-disciplinary, but it was a transfer because I wanted to get closer to home. My father had gotten sick when I was incarcerated. My mother had died in 2013, and then my father had gotten sick and he needed a kidney transplant. So they transferred me to the Eastern District, but sent me 100 miles away from my house.
How old was your mother when she passed away?
My mother was 61.
So your mother's 61. It must have hit, I mean, you're in prison.
It did. I mean, I was a mommy's boy growing up. So I went through a fog period is what I call it, of like 4 years of just existing. I go to the law library, but I was just existing. I go to the weight room, but I was just existing. I go play basketball or football, but I was just existing. I wasn't obtaining any type of information. I was merely existing. And then my brother had died 6 months after that.
Oh my goodness. So your mother passes away, your brother passes away, and now your father's sick.
And then my sister raised my kids for like the first 6 years that I was incarcerated. Then their mother came back into their life after her struggle with addiction and all that. So it was like a war with my sister. Every time I would call, it was never good news. It was always something about like my children's situation and where they were going to be placed. And it was hectic for a while.
As you're sitting in the prison and the time is ticking on, are you thinking like how things could have been different?
100% every day. That was the thought. I'd wake up every single day. I couldn't look in the mirror. And when I started to look in the mirror again, things should have been different. I should have made the right choices in life. I knew what I was doing was wrong.
Even though what you did was wrong, and even though you caused harm, do you think that there could have been a different way to approach you versus locking you up? Do you think locking you up helped keeping you away from people, was the right thing to do?
I believe that there were definitely therapeutic methods. Of course, I should have done the 11 and a half to 23 months that they should have given me according to the basic sentencing matrix in Pennsylvania, the crimes that I did commit. At the max, the crimes that I committed was 11 and a half to 23 months.
Do you think, so I got two questions. Do you think race played a factor in
100,
your case?
100%.
And I'm
not even the type to pull the race card, but 100.
So I'm going to ask you a part B, like how so? And number two, do you think the fact that you were this football star
200%
played a role? So talk about who you were made a difference in terms of how you were treated.
I never really was questioned that way. That was cool. I like that.
We like to do it a little differently. Ask you.
My lawyer actually told me, he said that this is a race issue. There are certain people in our office who let me know that this is completely a race issue. This was around the election, and my victim's family was something big in our county. So, and it's known that they don't really like my kind. They don't really like the guys in this melanin. And that's something that was known. I knew it was a race issue when I looked at
was the victim white?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
So I really appreciate you so much sharing that. I think that I do want to ask something of you, just because I'm needing this and feeling this in my body right now. I would like for us to refer to the person who was harmed as the person who was harmed,
Okay, the person
rather than flattening them into a victim.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you being so transparent and open what was going on with you, and the thought process, and being vulnerable in this space, because these are difficult conversations to have. And when I think about the media and the role that the media plays, as I'm hearing your story and I'm thinking about it and I'm reflecting on my own story and knowing that there is a component of race, right? There's a component of this football star that was so well loved, and then the person who was harmed looking very different from you, the people in the system looking very different from you. I really appreciate you sharing those things. You said my lawyer mentioned it to me. Had it occurred to you at all prior to that?
Definitely, because I'm just aware of the county that I live in, and I know how like the system works in our county. Plus, there were about 3 or 4 other cases like around the same time, and the sentences were like unbelievably complete differences. The harshness of my crime to some of the harshness of other crimes, it didn't match up with the time that the people were receiving. And then I would see these guys and I would know, oh, he's that color.
Right. We can say, why, like, okay, he was white.
And his victim was black. That's why the time was that way. It's not just a black and white.
So Joe, listen, we're not trying to sugarcoat things. We want to talk about what's real for you, and what your experience was.
Right.
So talk to us.
So how did that, I mean, sort of knowing that, again, if we start to talk about like how can we stop cycles of sexual harm, right? And we're thinking about if you are up against a system that is not treating you fairly, you're thinking about that, right? Because that is real harm, the disproportionate ways that we handle things. So that is creating a lack of safety in your body, a lack of safety in your life, which is not having you think about, well, you know, the harm that I caused was real to someone else, right? Am I characterizing that 100%. Correctly? Yes. So when you're incarcerated, you mentioned that a particular facility saved your life.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean? Were there services there for you? Were there people that you met there?
Yeah,
right.
The people that were at Laurel Highlands, they were classified in Pennsylvania as level 2. So a lot of guys that are level 2, they're not dangerous, really. Like the way that I put it, anyone who's classified as a level 2, this person's not dangerous, regardless of what they've done. He or she has done enough to receive a level 2 clearance. So at the time when I got sent there, Laurel Highlands was a level 2 facility. The people that I met there guided me through prison in a way that I needed it. I couldn't have went somewhere like SCI Green, or I couldn't have went somewhere like SCI Cold Township, because they were violence-based prisons at the time. Laurel Highlands, I was there maybe 8.5 years, like I said, and I might have seen 2 fights. So there was really no violence there, which allowed me to have a clearer mind to receive anything that was due to me in treatment. Like that made a complete difference, because when I ended up at Cold Township, treatment was different because there was so much violence around. I'm worried about watching my back. I'm not worried about what this facilitator is saying.
Right.
I'm known to have a sexual crime. Like anybody could do anything, even though no one in 13.5 years, guys would ask me, I didn't know that's what you were here for. And we would talk about it openly. I never had anybody be like, you effing this or you effing molester. None of that happened while I was in prison. And I was super fortunate for that to not happen, because I watched other guys go through complete hell.
And when you say, like, you know, there were people that were there that were helping you walk through, were those individuals who had been there longer, saw that this is the new person coming in, offered you some sort of warm accompaniment?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
It was mainly the people who had done a little bit of time and understood my situation. After they would speak to me, they would realize that I wasn't like the other younger guys. I could listen. That's what the guys recognized. I listened and I took constructive criticism well. So the guys gravitated to that. They liked teaching me. They liked showing me new things because I liked learning. So I listened. That's where I got the best advice from. But most of the guys either had done 10 years, 15 years, or some of them I hung out with that were guys that had life sentences.
So you talked at the beginning about having followers.
Yeah.
Right? Did you have followers while you were in prison?
Yeah. After a while, it became that because I was a good athlete. So anyone who's a good athlete in prison, it's like junior high. If anyone, not even high school, it's like junior high. Anyone who's a good athlete in prison, it doesn't matter what you did in jail. It doesn't matter. So if you were a sex offender or a rapist or whatever you want to be considered.
So again, I'm going to just stop you for a second, and we're going to go back to the labels.
Okay.
Right? So if you're someone who committed a sex offense.
If you're someone who committed a sex offense, in prison, if you're good at sports and you're okay in the law library, you're kind of safe, which is sad.
And then I wanted to unpack another thing that I heard you say, that when you were in a level 2 facility, you were with people who were not dangerous.
Yeah.
This sort of spurred some thinking in me, and again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. The idea that people are inherently dangerous or not dangerous. Do you think that that's a static thing, or do you think that that is something that fluctuates and changes?
It depends on which environment you put a person in, because when you put a person like myself who's not really dangerous, if you put me in a place like Cole Township, I may have to force or become dangerous to protect myself. Mm-hmm. So I actually believe that it's the environment that's fostered around a person that can bring that out of a person. Because I've seen guys come into the prisons who I know never fought, but they didn't have a choice there.
Right. When you say the environment, did that have a lot to do with the culture of the way people were treated, the layout, what do you think created an environment?
The school. Nothing was connected. It was treated like a campus. It wasn't like one static unit. It was a bunch of different buildings. They had the track in the middle. It made everyone feel like they were at a school rather than being in a prison, except there were bars and razor wire that if you were conscious enough, you would see that. But if you didn't look at that, you almost felt like you were at like a campus.
And so when you were interacting with the staff, what was that like? Because the experiences that we hear from a lot of people has to do with the dehumanization that happens to someone when they're incarcerated. Was there a difference between the interactions with the staff at that facility and the subsequent ones? How did that work?
I had maybe 2 guards in my whole 14 years be like negative towards me, but I watched them be negative towards other people. I watched staff. So really at Laurel Highlands, the staff, they were pretty cool. I actually have to, at every facility, I never really had too much trouble with the staff, with myself, but I watched how they are with other individuals. They treated me because I was a CPS, I was a peer assistant, and I was a certified peer specialist, so they treated me a little different. And sometimes I didn't like that treatment.
Did that cause problems for you?
Sometimes it made guys think like, well, why does this person treat you this way and they treat us that way? And I would have to explain to them,
Joe, you said you was sentenced to 13 years, but was there for 14. Yep. You told us a little bit at the beginning, but I've heard of people who are sentenced to 13 and then they serve like half the time. Like, how come you had to serve not only all of it, but a little bit more?
See, my actual time in Pennsylvania, they give us double time. So I was sentenced to a 13 to 26. Oh. So my actual sentence is 26.
I see. So you actually served half your time.
Yes, I served half my time.
Plus another
year because I wasn't finished a program.
And I'm sorry, what year did you come out?
Last year, November 9th of 2023.
2023. So you had a lot of years prior to COVID-19 pandemic. Yep. But you were there. Yep. Your final years were during the beginning of that pandemic.
422 days in a cell with 15 minutes out of the cell. You had to choose 10 minutes for a shower or 5 minutes for a phone or vice versa.
So your life towards the end was drastically different.
It was strange.
And did that impact your ability to finish that program? Was that why you were there an extra year?
Yes and no. The person that I harmed actually reached out to the Attorney General's office and wrote that I didn't commit the IDSI charge. So I possessed all this paperwork from the Attorney General, the District Attorney's office. They had wrote me to file an emergency PCRA. So I filed this emergency PCRA. But I can't do the program because I'm not admitting to the crime that I'm there for, but I'm admitting to everything else. Right. So in the midst of that, they told the person that I harmed that if she comes to court to testify, then a perjury charge would be thrown against her. So she disappeared. And it left me in limbo where I would have actually finished the program a year before.
I want to make sure I understand. So she wanted to come forward and say, you got it wrong.
Yes.
However, if she came forward and said you got it wrong, then she could be arrested herself and get into trouble for a perjury charge. And so they use that rather than just doing the right thing and coming forward, it backfired on you.
Completely. And
it backfired on her as well, because she wanted to live in truth.
Courage and strength.
Right?
She mustered this courage and strength to come out and say, listen, I know what happened. Like, this is what happened to me. She, like, that strength that she used to come and go to the district attorney's office on her own. Like, this all appeared out of the blue.
Good for her.
Yes, yes.
Right. And that meant that when you went to the parole board, that you had not finished the program and therefore you were not granted parole because you were serving that 13 to 26. And so for those who don't understand or haven't been with the system, because we have listeners of all kinds, what would happen is if you are serving 13 to 26, when that 13 year comes, you have the opportunity to go in front of the parole board and they can say, why, yes, you've done what you're supposed to do. So talk a little bit about that process, because it's almost, in many ways, people describe it as like retrying the crime, reopening old wounds after so many years. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, in PA, we have what they call pre-parole. So before you actually see the parole board, they give you 4 months before that. They have a few meetings with your counselor, your unit manager, the person that's on the block with you, your unit manager, and some staff that are there. And you answer a bunch of questions. You go over everything that you're supposed to talk about at the parole hearing. But most of the stuff in pre-parole doesn't align with what you hear in parole because it's a human endeavor. They're not going to ask you the same questions that these people ask you from 4 months ago. So really it's like you have to go up there and just be able to speak. And not only just speak, convey the language that they taught you. So whatever you learned in programming, you better remember how to convey that message back to them, or else if you don't speak their language, it's considered manipulating the system, which is also a parole hit and can give you another 6 to 12 months to do on top of that. So if you're not educated or can't speak in front of people, you are like way back.
So that puts people who maybe someone has an intellectual disability.
Absolutely.
Maybe someone has a
fear
fear of speaking. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate you sharing that. That puts different people in different populations at a significant disadvantage. So you spent the 14 years. Tell us a little bit about release. What does it look like when you're released? It's only been a year, right?
1 year.
So what happens there?
I was fortunate enough to come home to a community that welcomed me and a family network, but it was different. My mother wasn't here. My brother wasn't here. Life was completely different. I mean, it was a complete shock. Technology had changed. My friends had gotten older. My kids grew.
I can imagine, you go in and you think 13 years, I'm going to just hit pause. And then when I come out, everything's going to be the same, and I'll just start over.
I come out with the heaviest label in the universe. Mm-hmm. Like, regardless of how much support I had, I have the heaviest label on earth over top of my head.
And did your father pass, or is your father?
No, my father's actually doing good. He's actually healthy and he's doing well. Yeah, he received a kidney transplant.
Good.
He's healthy and living.
That's amazing. And so you said you came out to family support. Did you have any struggles trying to find a place to stay? Were there any barriers?
No, I didn't.
You were allowed to live with your family?
Yes, I did. That was pretty much easy, but I do still have trouble with finding employment. So I was working at a place for about 7 or 8 months. Everything was good. And through my t-shirt business, there was another person at where I was working at that had a t-shirt business. And we were battling over whose t-shirts were better in this facility. Well, I guess I kind of won the battle. So a person that I grew up with and loved dearly and still do to this day went to the human resources and said, listen, I don't feel safe with Joe Nicholson working in this building. I know his situation. And they knew my situation also because I disclosed everything with them. Yeah. But she told them that she was going to tell the higher ups, and they basically had to turn their back on me.
Right. And so this is a pretty common story with folks who are in reentry with a variety of labels and convictions. but particularly for individuals who have been convicted of a crime of a sexual nature. And so, what were you feeling in that moment?
I felt, for that moment, almost hopeless. Like I felt hopeless again. It was like I was just snatched right out of the water. But luckily, my partner, my love of my life, she picked me up out the mud once again and told me, like, listen, you are more important than what is happening. That had to happen. So you could go explain this to people and let them know what this is like living as a reentrant on the registry.
That's wonderful. When you say your partner, is this a girlfriend?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
And so this is obviously a very positive relationship in
Definitely.
your life and provides support. So you started to get involved in advocacy. Yep. Tell us a little bit about that.
While I was in prison, I ran a couple groups, and I created a group that we would call Pathfinder while I was in prison to just help guys find paths, develop action plans, reentry plans for success. And I'm actually just trying to bring that concept and program to the street now that I'm out here, because I know that it could help certain individuals, especially those who are justice impacted and the guys on the registry, because I can put myself in, I'm in your shoes.
Right. I love the name because everybody has their own path.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got to hold torches for one another.
All right. That's beautiful. What does it mean? Like you're creating paths to
creating
where?
paths for success. Really creating paths inward so you can create outward. It's all on you.
Joe pointed to his shirt, and it says Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Can you describe it?
There's a torch here because we have to hold the light up for everybody. Light is truth. The Liberty Bell to represent PA. PA, because we're from Pennsylvania, and PA also for peer assistant. We're supposed to assist our peers, and I use the video game font because I like video games.
There's nothing wrong with that.
All right.
But as you think, that's what you are, man. So don't think that you are this because you are that.
Is a certain amount of like the Pathfinder program, does it speak to keeping each other accountable?
That's exactly what it is. We have to be accountable first. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say that, yes, this is what I did, but allow me to fix that. And I start with myself fixing this.
Right.
We can't blame anybody outside of me. We have to start here first in our center.
So some of that is based on your own experience of self-reflection and unpacking the layers inside yourself, and then creating a mechanism to share that information with other people so that they can follow a similar path.
Thank you for explaining my thing clearer than what I could explain. That's exactly what it is.
Oh, I love it. That sounds really exciting. So you were working on that while you were inside.
Yep.
And you mentioned we're bringing it to the streets. What does that mean? What format does that look like?
My partner is a retired sergeant of 30 years, a police sergeant, and we're going into Chester County Prison to basically give like a preseason game, to talk to some of the guys who are in the prison to say, hey, do you guys think that this will work in the facility? But we want to do this in front of the staff so they can see that the inmates and the prisoners, they actually want this to be implemented in the prisons. And from there, we hope that it grows. I don't see why it won't or shouldn't or couldn't. And I'm looking to join other people who are doing the same thing. This is not a one team. It can't be. It's not a one team effort. There's too many people.
Right. And so you're basically piloting it, and then you're getting that feedback from the folks that have been in a similar situation to you. Okay.
Good. Do you want to ask your final question?
Yeah, so we have really appreciated you coming and sharing your story and being so vulnerable today, and very excited for the things to come. I have one last question for you before we wrap up our time together, and that is, thinking back on like your younger self, right? You've done a lot of that inner work. If you had a piece of advice for someone who is at the very beginning of a journey similar to your own, what would that be?
Look at yourself in the mirror every day and tell yourself positive affirmation. Tell yourself positive things. Know your value, understand your worth, and realize this isn't your worst. This may be your worst, but it's not going to be your worst. It's going to get better in the future. Things are going to happen beneficial for you. As long as you take that and you live by that and don't let anyone sway you from that,
you will be good. There's no way, the universe works that way. You cannot stop that. So if you keep a positive mentality, positive things will happen. Even if the situation around you is negative, positive things will happen because it's due to you.
Love that. Jason, you have any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Last thoughts are, this is the first time, Amber, that we've recorded in the same physical presence, right?
Right.
We have,
Yeah, we're just groundbreaking over here.
This is so I'm going to tell you in Judaism we have a prayer for, and I don't usually do this, but it's fun. It's a shechechianu. It's like thanks for bringing us to this season, and it goes Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh, which basically means, hey, we're here together. Thanks.
Yeah, I like
so
that.
I want to say thank you.
Thank you guys.
We got to meet you this morning for the first time. Hear your story, Joe, from where you've been to where you are is amazing, incredible. You had your story. Your story has this. It had a big high and then a dip, and now you're back on that climb.
Yeah.
And I see great things for you. You're bringing it back to the community. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this and what you guys are doing for us. And I think this is necessary. So I will always be grateful for you guys allowing me to amplify my voice on you guys' podcast, because this is necessary for all of us. It's not just about people on the registry. It's not just about people in prison. This is necessary for everyone to be able to be heard, and not just heard, listened to.
Right, love that. And with that,
until next time, Amber.
We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. For more information, episodes, and podcast notes, visit amplifiedvoices.show.